the dial, turn it loud. Miami's pride, make us proud. CanesWear crew, you hear the crowd. Hurricanes ain't backing down. Every play, every score, raising bets and raising roar. Rocking orange, green galore. All for one and one for four. We got FTSN, taking names, win it again. Broadcast fam, till the end. Tune in, now let's begin.
Yo, what's going on, Canes fans? As y'all know, this is another daily CanesWear podcast. I am your host, Brad Tejeda. We're going to switch it up a little bit. We got some new behind-the-scenes artwork behind me. I got some new stuff that we'll be incorporating, not only in today's show, but moving forward. I think y'all are going to start to like some of the formats that we're going with. So shout out to our guy, Bobby, working behind the scenes, doing his due diligence, man. Shout out to you. And also, shout out to all you Cane fans that are tuned in. Whether you're listening or watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. This is the CanesWear Daily Podcast, only on FTSN. I am your host, Brad Tejeda, and we got a lot to talk about, right? We had a bye week this past week. Our Miami Hurricanes, as if you know, like myself, had a nice, chill, relaxing weekend. Got to kick your feet up, watch some good college football games. Didn't have to worry whether it was noon, 3:30, 7 o'clock, or as y'all saw and experienced last week with the 10:30 Eastern time kickoff. We didn't have to wait all day. We got to relax, got on the barbecue, hang out with the kids, hang out with the family, and just enjoy your time seeing some of these other fan bases go crazy. And yet again, another week where big teams go down. And, of course, Miami, once again, when it comes to the college football ranking system currently week-to-week basis, you guys see it. We don't get the respect. We don't get the love, and that's only because we're the U. We know that every single week that we line up against the opponent, we're their Super Bowl. I mean, we've seen it all the way back to the South Florida. I mean, actually, let's back it up before that, right? First game of the year in the Swamp, in-state rivalry game, all the Florida fans bickering that we're the same old Miami team. You know, we got a guy in Cam Ward that's never played, and it's atmosphere like the Swamp. Well, guess what? We already know how that happened, right? We all sung Tom Petty in the end of that third, fourth quarter. Nothing but Cane fans in there. Then you fast forward to the Tampa showdown against South Florida in Tampa Bay, Raymond James Stadium. And you guys remember the head coach during the press conference called out not only USF, but the whole fan base and the students. They wanted to pack that stadium. They opened up the third tier, that stadium, which I was present in, and it was a clean sweep by the third, fourth quarter. It was nothing but Cane fans in there. And then you lead up to the Virginia Tech game. First in-state, in ACC play. First cousin, Kyron first Cam. And we had a tough victory, right? It came out to the last play of the game. Calls went our way. The correct calls, I would say, at that. And then last week, before this past weekend, you had the Cal game that miraculously had the biggest college comeback this football season by our Miami Hurricanes. And this past week, we're on a bye. And now, leading up to this upcoming week, like I said before the show, we got a busy week ahead of this CanesWear Daily Podcast. Today, we're going to be breaking down a few topics that we're going to talk about and discuss. I want all the Cane fans that are tuned in to definitely interact and drop those comments. Tomorrow, we will be having our daily live show with me, Brett, Cliff, Armando, and of course a special guest, whoever wants to jump in. Usually we do that around 8 o'clock. We are going to be starting a new time tomorrow at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So check us out tomorrow, 7 Eastern. And then on Wednesday, folks, I'm actually going to be having a rider for the Louisville Cardinals. I'm actually going to be having Kevin Wright of Card Chronicle that'll be joining me on Wednesday, 7 o'clock Eastern time. So we'll be having that as well. We'll have a fan interaction show at the end of the week before we watch it live as well. But getting back to today's show, we got a few discussions and topics that I want to really bring up with you guys. And like I said before, we got some awesome creative stuff that Bobby's been working on behind the scenes. So shout out to him. But the first one we're going to go with is this bye week history, right? Let's not shy away from the elephant in the room. Bye week and Miami Hurricanes football just don't get along. This is a team that in my opinion, I don't know if it's the preparation. I don't know if it's the coaching. I don't know if it's the players. I don't know if it's the atmosphere, but something has to change, right? And I think we all can agree as Hurricane fans. I mentioned the Gator game. I mentioned the South Florida game, the Virginia Tech game, the Cal game. These were all set up to be somewhat big time opportunities for this program to kind of change the ways things have been in prior years, right? The history, the old bad history. We need to clear the cache, delete the browsing history, and create a new format. And so far this year, we have been able to delete old history and create something new, right? And this is going to be another opportunity for our Miami Hurricanes to do just that. Why am I saying that, right? This is a team that in 8 years has not won off the bye. Okay. Last 8 football seasons, the University of Miami have not won off a bye week. And that's very telling, not only for us, but even for Mario Cristobal, right? Because this is a head coach in Mario who prior to Miami was 7-0 after the bye. 7-0 at Oregon after the bye week for Mario Cristobal, right? And that goes back to my point, what I was talking about. How is it the coaches? Is it the players? Is it just the logo? Is it the environment? I don't know what it is, the preparation, but it's got to change, right? And this is yet another week for our Miami Hurricanes to rewrite history. Shout out to my boy E, man, since Obama, right? We haven't won a bye week since Obama. This will be a huge measuring stick again. Another week for Miami to really test and measure themselves. Going back to the statistical stats, Mario was 7-0 at Oregon before coming to Miami, and now being 0-2 currently at Miami as the head coach coming off byes. So he's continuing the Miami bye streak of not winning off a bye. And that is one of the many reasons why this is going to be a huge test for this Miami team. And we'll get into the rest of the huge tests later on. But digging right back into this bye week, right? Let's look into this. Last year, coming off a bye, you lost that 23-20 loss to Georgia Tech. We all know about that. You know, the mismanaged timeouts, the play calling, the fumble on Don Chaney that was not a fumble. And what a coincidence we'll be playing him this weekend, right? I mean, you got the 23-20 loss to Georgia Tech last year, which was a 3-point loss. And then, coincidentally, the year before, coming off a bye, you lose to North Carolina by 3 points, 27-24. So your last 2 years, Mario Cristobal is your head coach. You're losing by 3 points each season coming off the bye, okay? Now, when you really look at the totality of this football season so far for the Miami Hurricanes and leading up to this matchup against Louisville, which we'll be breaking down every little detail on Wednesday with our guy, Kevin of Card Chronicle. But for right now, we're going to just touch the surface on a couple of these things. But when you really just look on the big totality of this season so far, I think us Miami fans, we can all agree that, especially as far as the offensive side of the football, not only has nobody really on the team had a complete game, whether that's Cam Ward having that A-plus game, you know, he still had some moments, whether it was early on or late in the game, where he hit some rough spots. And ultimately, at the end of the game where we needed him the most, he's put on the Superman cape and done his job. And so has Xavier Strepo, the offensive lineman, Andy Borgallis, and, of course, Lance Guidry's adjustments to the defense side of the ball. All these things play a huge part in it, right? But going back to the offense, I think we can all agree, watching this team so far, what we know with the players we have capable, and what Shannon Dawson has kind of teased in the offseason, I think we could all agree that I think Miami has really been holding on to a lot of things that I don't think fans or opposing teams have been able to game plan or see yet. And that's a big telling sign for me, because going into this Louisville, Duke, and Florida State stretch, next few games for Miami, this is really going to tell a lot for this football team. That the last few weeks, has it been luck? Has it been more of Cam Ward and company really just taking it on for themselves? Or can we really start to make the mistakes that we've had in prior weeks? Can we adjust to those and really capitalize on those? Because the big plays on defense, right? Last year, I believe we had 7 big plays last year on defense of 20-plus yards. We already have 11 so far this year. So that alone, I mean, Jaden Harris, Mish Powell, some of those guys really got to step it up on the back end in the secondary. But going back to the offense, I think we can all agree tight ends haven't been used that much. Running game definitely needs to step it up a notch. Wide receivers, Jacoby, Isaiah Horton, those guys have been doing their thing. Sam Brown, JoJo Trader, and others can definitely take that next step up. But I think that this will start to be the game that we're going to start to see some stuff out of Shannon Dawson's playbook that we haven't seen all year. We're going to start to see the tight ends more involved. We're going to start to see maybe one or two trick plays in the next 2 or 3 weeks, in my opinion. But I think this is the time where you really got to buckle down and really hone in week to week. Because when you really look at it, we'll talk about it soon about the ACC standings and the NCAA rankings and really what it's going to mean for Miami moving forward and how telling of a sign it is to make sure we capitalize each and every week and continue to get the wins. I mentioned it before. Guys like Jaden Harris, Mish Powell definitely need to step it up the next few weeks. I'm sure there's some guys on the offensive side of the ball and defensive side of the ball that you Cane fans could definitely agree or shout out as well. Make sure you do that in the comment. But before I get to our next topic, I just need y'all to make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Like I said before, this is the CanesWear Daily Podcast. I am your host, Brad Tejeda. And make sure you go to CanesWear.com for all your needs, whether it's Miami Hurricanes, Miami Marlins, Inter Miami, Miami Dolphins, Florida Panthers, reigning champions who are starting off on a good note this hockey season. They got all the new Cam Ward jerseys. I just made a big order myself this past week. I got me one, got the kids some, and they will be getting the new Hurricane Alpha Boost as well, which are on pre-order, and tons of other merchandise. So please make sure you go to CanesWear.com for all your merch. And getting back to our next topic, right, folks? We talk a little bit about the bye week. Like I mentioned before, this is a team in the last 8 years has not won off the bye. Mario is currently 0-2 as the Miami head coach, coming off a bye after being undefeated 7-0 at Oregon. So this is going to be one of the many tests that we're going to talk about this upcoming week coming off the bye. But the next category, the next topic I want to talk about with you folks is some of these new NCAA rules that I think really got glossed over this past week while Miami's been on a bye. The first and foremost, the first thing that I saw in the last few days was the new transfer portal window. The new transfer portal window has been shortened from 45 to 30 days. What does that mean for us, folks? That means that essentially in college football, your window is going to be December 9th through December 28th and April 16th through April 25th. And then for you college basketball fans out there, unfortunately, I got 50% on that. We didn't land the Boozer twins, but we did land Ahmad. And I don't think that one's going to be ending yet for the Boozer twins. They probably will likely stay with Duke, but I think Miami's going to continue to do what they can to try to work that one over. But as far as the college basketball transfer portal, the new window is after the second round of the tournament. So like I mentioned before with basketball, December 9th through the 28th, April 16th through 25th, those windows have been shortened 15 days from 45 to 30. Also, another huge NCAA rule as well. You can by a new team once your name is officially in the portal. So once you're signed to a school, no other school can make contact with you or tamper or gain any leverage or kind of say, hey, man, I found a loophole to necessarily, get you here instead. So even though you signed publicly with one team, and we've seen it this past transfer portal window. I mean, you've seen some crazy stuff with guys like Tyler Barron, Simeon Barrow, just on our roster alone. But you've seen other college players all around the country sign with one team and then a couple days later bounce around. There's been a couple running backs out there, a couple guys from Ole Miss that ended up signing at one school and then ended up going to another school. So again, another rule with this NCAA rule is once you officially announce your name in the portal and you sign with that school, I mean, you're done. There is no tampering or contact. So even if you haven't physically gotten to campus yet, if you go out there on social media and you announce that you're signing with this school, paperwork, agent, so-and-so behind the scenes, if everything's been done, that's it. There is no more playing this game where it's like, hey, man, I'm gonna use my social media to my advantage and maybe attach a school that maybe isn't really signing me just to get some other schools involved and kind of tamper and make that money go up as far as the bag of getting that original school to really sign you. And I think that is really going to help Miami in the future. And of course, some other schools like Texas as well. But those were two big NCAA rules that were just announced this past week. So definitely look out for those. Another one regarding recruiting. As y'all know, I love me some recruiting. There's a lot of Cane fans and football freaks out there that love recruiting like myself. There's also been some new recruiting news this past week. NCAA is eliminating the NLI, the National Letter of Intent of Financial Aid, and scholarship agreements are expected to be used. So what does that really mean exactly, right? Your future recruits will have to sign agreements that essentially include how much money they are expected to earn at that school on National Signing Day. So National Signing Day is essentially going to be the truth teller to all these schools, head coaches, and kind of some of these shady things that are going on behind the scenes that a lot of people publicly aren't hearing about. Those things are now going to be put to bed because now on National Signing Day, you're going to have a plan in place. And once that is signed, that is it. It is intact. That is going to kind of eliminate the Jaden Rashada stuff that's been going on with Florida, Arizona State in the past, and of course, some of these other big-time recruits that's happened to. You see some players recently mid-season leave their school. A lot of it has to do with NIL and money aspect as well. So the NLI, which is your National Letter of Intent, so let's not confuse the two. A little different from your NIL. The National Letter of Intent, which is what you're going to be to sign to actually be enrolled at that school. Now you're going to have to make sure that whatever school you sign your NLI to, they do their due diligence and they have a legit plan for you financially, right? It's one thing to go to a campus like the University of Miami, and you got a guy like Mario Cristobal, Shannon Dawson, Lance Guidry, Coach Jackson. The names go on, and you get to sit in the film room with them, go on the projection screen, watch some current players practice, and you see the plan in place for what you're going to do on the field. But then there's a whole nother side of it, right? They could tell you, they could have a nice PowerPoint, they could tell you all the nice things, but do their words line up to what's actually going to happen? This that is going to be in place currently, what I just mentioned, is going to put a lot of those things at bed. So it's a really good thing for your college athletes. And I think all in all, it's going to really put the Jimmies and the Joes as far as universities that really know what they're doing from an NIL and NIL standpoint. So that is your last bit of news for the NCAA rules. So like I mentioned before, transfer portal window has shortened for both college football and college basketball. And then, of course, the recruiting news, like I mentioned, your NLI, your financial aid, and your scholarship agreement will be expected to be used. And that National Signing Day is really going to be a tell-all for most stuff right there. Now, going from the NCAA rules that just got done passing, we got to jump into some recruiting, right? As y'all know, I love me some Miami Hurricanes recruiting. And even though this team is off to a very good start, this was a bye week for our Miami Hurricanes. And Mario Cristobal, as y'all know, the loafers will continue to step. There are tons of miles on those things, and they are not stopping anytime soon. We were on a bye this past week. That doesn't mean that you're just prepping and gearing up for your Louisville matchup the following week, but you're also doing your due diligence and you're going to places across the country to really get some eyes on some of these recruits that you're going after. Some big names had some news in the past week or two. Let's go right off the bat with some unfortunate news, in my opinion. It's going to be Elijah Griffin out of the state of Georgia, one of the number one defensive linemen in the country. As y'all know, Georgia, Miami, USC were pretty much the top three schools there. He has now announced that he will be committing on October 18th, which is in 4 days. He recently visited Georgia native guy, very close to his birthday. Unfortunately, folks, I think the writing is on the wall on this one. I would expect Elijah Griffin, who's the number one target for Miami and any team in the country, is probably going to be making that commitment to Georgia on October 18th. Now, what does that mean for other defensive line targets for the University of Miami? Because as we know, we made the defensive line room a top priority in this past class. Jason Taylor, Coach Joe Salavea, and others really got a huge class out of that. Armando Blunt, Justin Scott, Marquise Lightfoot, Cole McConaughey, and others. Shout out to those guys. And none of them have really even touched the surface of what they're going to be capable of doing. And you love to see that while our defense is still continuing to at least do what they're capable of and at least get the wins. But what does that mean for the defensive line room, right? You also had another important player in the 2026 defensive line room that Miami was going after, possibly the number one guy on their board as well in 2026, and Jakeem Stewart. He has now reclassified to 2025 from St. Augustine, Louisiana. It is more than likely that he is probably going to be staying at home and committing to LSU. There is no timetable or commitment date on the table for Jakeem Stewart, but him reclassifying and LSU being the likely favorite there, that kind of sits you in a bind where, all right, now your number one and your number two essentially top targets in the D-line room are probably going to go elsewhere. Your third guy was Iosa, who ended up staying home following the family ties, right, and going to was it Iowa, I believe? Pretty sure it was Iowa. So with those three top targets at defensive line, something's going to have to shake for this room, right? There's no way that this Miami program is going to continue to win ball games each and every week, continue to climb within that top 4, top 5 ranking, get into the college playoffs, possibly win an ACC championship, knock out all these milestones that Miami has never done in the last 20 years, and the recruiting is just going to be at a standstill. It's just not going to happen. Not when you got Mario Cristobal and this coaching staff, and not when you're actually finally winning games and looking like a top-tier caliber football team. So where are some of these names going to shake, right? Let me give you a couple names that are possibly on flip watch, not currently at the moment, but just looking in the future and the next couple months leading into the end of the football season, as long as the trajectory of Miami continues to happen, right? You got to start right off the bat with Malachi Toney. I know he recently decommitted, and Alabama seems to be the favorite right now, but let's just wait that one out and see. I will say this, with the wide receiver position, you already got Dalen Upshaw, you got Joshua Moore already locked in. That room, as far as committing to this 2025 class as a wide receiver, is slimming down and making things very tough very quickly. So guys like Malachi Toney, guys like Tyler Williams, Dallas Wilson, just those three alone, along with Vernell Brown and Jamie French, one or two of those guys are really going to have to make a choice in the next couple months if they really want to jump in the boat, because sooner or later it's going to get real tight, and once the ship has sailed, see you later. There's no looking back. And he's going to be a guy that I think you're really going to have to watch, because even though he did decommit, I know the family, especially mom, definitely wants him to stay home at Miami. There's been no secret about it. She's at pretty much every Miami Hurricane football event. Doesn't even have to be going to the actual football game. She does a lot behind the scenes as far as being at those type of events. So that really goes to show you that this family is definitely invested into the program. And of course, at wide receiver, you also got Vernell Brown and Tyler Williams and Dallas Wilson. Out of those four names, those are going to be the four guys to really watch out for. Miami is not going to be shy about trying to flip some of these Florida commits, whether it's Vernell Brown, whether it's Ben Hanks, or even 2026 corner Jalen Waters from Armwood. That school in particular is going to be one to watch for Miami, not only this year, but next year. Again, going back to the defensive line room, we brought up three big names that are most likely going to end up elsewhere. Hayden Lowe, USC commit currently. As y'all know, USC is currently 3-3 right now. It's not looking good for that program. Hayden Lowe is a guy that I would watch throughout the rest of the football season. Jason Taylor, he's going to have to sink his teeth in on one of these guys and really just kind of say, all right, you are my guy that I want to mold to be the next guy under me this next class. He hasn't really done that yet. And I think Hayden Lowe, USC current commit, would be a real good choice and good possibility. Other defensive line targets that you're going to need to look out for is Jarquez Carter out of Newberry High School. This past weekend, was able to watch their football game. Him and Micah Newton, who is currently already committed in this class, defensive end. Both of those guys have been having phenomenal seasons so far this year. And I like where we not only stand with Micah Newton, obviously, who's already currently committed, but Miami's going to continue to chop wood with Jarquez Carter, who's currently committed to Ohio State. I do know that there is some similar interest where Jarquez Carter definitely is still looking at Miami as a possibility. So that is another name to look out for. And, of course, Derry Norris, Georgia Tech commit, as y'all know, from Spruce Creek. He's a guy to also watch out for. I wouldn't think more news will pop up on him until it gets closer to that Georgia Tech game, November 9th. So look for that weekend to really heat up for someone like Derry Norris, especially if we go into Georgia Tech territory, get that W in Georgia and Atlanta, and Derry Norris is in attendance on Georgia Tech's dime, most likely, and we end up flipping that commitment, right? That's on the defensive line side of the football. To keep it on the defensive side of the ball, you also got TJ Alford, Vero Beach, linebacker. He's another guy to watch out for, Ohio State commit. Let's not shy away from the real, right? Ohio State commits and Mario seem to have a very good camaraderie when it gets to the end of football season, when it gets closer to that early signing day. TJ Alford is a guy that we have reestablished contact with, and he is another name to watch out for to pair with a possible Kellen Wiley and, of course, the linebacker for IMG. Now, going to the offensive side of the football, one other name that I want to bring up is Solomon Thomas. He's an offensive lineman, currently committed to Florida State. He's a guy that's been at Miami 5, 6, 7 times. I believe last time I saw him in person was at the spring game before the season started. He's a guy that's always been intact with the University of Miami program. Another guy that Miami has not lost relationship and communication with. Obviously, you guys see how the Florida State season is pairing out. That could be another name to watch out for, especially when it gets closer to that Florida State-Miami rematch in the next couple of weeks. So look out for Solomon Thomas as far as recruiting. That is really it when it comes to the recruiting aspect. I touched on a bunch of names. If there's any other names that I didn't touch on that you want me to kind of bring up to date with some of you guys, just let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to do so. If not, you could shoot me a DM on @TejedaBrad on Twitter, and I'll be happy to do so as well. Now, getting to our next topic is going to be the college football rankings, right? Let's look into these college football rankings real quick. I am just like most of you Cane fans. Every single week, I see these AP rankings, Josh Pate rankings, and all these other ones, and they're all laughable. I mean, I don't take any of them serious, even the AP poll. At the end of the day, the message is very simple. Week 1, 1-0. Week 2, 1-0. Week 3, 1-0. The message is always the same. Win your week and continue to move on. Don't worry about the rest. All these other things will pan out and play out eventually. But as you guys saw this past week, our Miami Hurricanes were on a bye, and we did not move up or down. We are still currently number 6. While you have some other teams out there that, because of either the conference they play in or maybe it's because of the logo and being relevant in the past 5 years in college football, unlike Miami, they're getting a little bit more love and attention from the poll voters, unlike Miami. You got schools like Ohio State and Oregon who essentially just flip spots, and the top 5 pretty much remain the same, right? I was under the impression that possibly Miami could at least move up 1 spot to number 5 after this week because of the Ohio State and Oregon matchup, but obviously that didn't end up happening. Then you look at other schools, right? Look at a team like Penn State, for instance. You look at a team like Penn State, who is ranked up there essentially like Miami, but who have they honestly beat as far as their opponents compared to who Miami has played, right? You have a USC team who I mentioned earlier is 3-3 currently. They're not looking well at all. And then you had an Illinois team that was ranked at the time that I believe they won, right? So those were their 2 impressive wins. I would say, Florida was a somewhat impressive win at the time for Miami. And then even a Cal game, college game day, there was a lot against us not only in that game, but Virginia Tech as well throughout the football game. And we overcame all those tribulations. And of course, we don't get any pat on the back. It's essentially, hey, you guys got lucky. We'll leave you where you are. But then when you really dig deep into this Penn State team compared to Miami, even if you want to say, hey, maybe they did play better teams so far as the wins, look at their stats. They haven't really blown people out like Miami have, at least early on in the season. Their defense have given up somewhat a good amount of points. Their offense hasn't put up that many amount of points. And just statistically, they don't match up anywhere close to Miami in many different categories, where our Miami Hurricanes are number one or number two in so many categories, or even top 10 on the defense in a lot of categories, right? That team in Penn State, you gotta think whether it's the conference they play in or just how well they've been able to play as a football program the last 5-10 years. They're a lot more relevant than Miami. Maybe that has something to do with the poll voting. But all in all, we know our Miami Hurricanes are yet again getting shafted. And another school, of course, is LSU. LSU moved up 5 spots from 13 to 8. And Ole Miss dropped 9 spots from 9 to 18, right? And when you look at the current rankings after this bye week, yes, Miami did not play this past week, but I'm shaking my head at teams like Ole Miss and Michigan. Like I mentioned before, if you're just really looking at the logo or the conference, these are two tell signs, in my opinion, in Ole Miss and Michigan, who are both the only 2 teams that have 2 losses on their record currently and are both ranked in the top 25. I don't know about you guys, but that's a slap in the face for some of these other schools. That just goes to show you it's really just the logo that holds weight. A team like Ole Miss, they really put all their bread and butter into this transfer portal, paying all these players, having this crazy Madden stacked roster similar to Miami, and yet they're doing the complete opposite of what Miami's doing on the football field. So I like where we are as far as a roster standpoint, development standpoint, and best bang for your buck. I think Miami is really hitting on all their transfer portal guys. And E made a good point as well. I don't care about the rankings except college football rankings. Completely agree with you. And we're going to actually shift into that, right? College football rankings don't really matter right now. Our number one focus is win every single week, like I mentioned before. But ultimately, we all know that the first achievement for our Miami Hurricanes is getting to that ACC championship. And not only getting to the ACC championship, but winning the ACC championship. I was there the last time Miami was in the ACC against Clemson. It was a very cold night. I do not want to relive those moments. I left in the second quarter. It was so damn cold, and we were getting our butts whooped. The only cool thing about that moment was College Game Day and being able to wear my CanesWear all-white starter jacket, which I can't wait to bring out. So make sure y'all go back to CanesWear.com and grab you one of those before it gets cold again. But going back to the ACC portion, right? We touched on the college AP rankings just a minute ago. But let's talk about the ACC potential 3-leg race that could go on the rest of the football season. I'm talking about Miami, Clemson, and the SMU Hurricanes. Yes, the SMU Hurricanes, because half of SMU's roster seems to be Miami Hurricane ex-players or guys that are at least doing somewhat well for them, right? You got Brashard Smith, who seems to be one of the top transfer portal guys this season. Him and Cam Ward, I believe, are the 2 highest graded guys. How funny and coincidentally is that? But when you look at this 3-leg race, possibly Miami, SMU, and Clemson, when you look at SMU, they're favored to win every game, possibly the rest of the season, just like Miami and Clemson, right? So now when you really look at these schedules of what is ahead of us, you look at a team like SMU, who's got to go at Stanford, at Duke, play a ranked Pitt team, Boston College at home, at Virginia, and then against Cal, right? We know how Cal plays. Other than that, we haven't really seen any of these other opponents yet. We'll see how Duke fares out. And then when you look at Clemson, they have a lot of similar opponents, whether it's Virginia or Pittsburgh as well, like I mentioned. But then they also got to play at VTech, against Louisville at home, which we'll be able to experience that this weekend, noon game. We'll be able to discuss that on Wednesday, like I said, with Kevin from Card Chronicles. And then, of course, they finished the season with two non-conference games, which really won't mean much for what we're talking about currently in this ACC stake. And then, of course, you got our Miami Hurricanes with at Louisville this weekend, Florida State, Duke, at Georgia Tech, against Wake Forest, and ending the season at Syracuse. So all in all, when you really look at these three schedules with these three teams remaining that could possibly make it to the ACC championship, Miami's the only school currently not facing a ranked opponent as we stand today. But as we know, rankings don't really mean much. But I think, again, like I mentioned before, these next 3 weeks, Louisville, Florida State, Duke, are really going to be a telltale sign for this program and this team to see how much adversity we could really overcome, and if we can really start to create another build of confidence like we did at the beginning of the season, right? Beginning of the season was your first reset, okay? It was nothing but hype. It was our fans, their fans hyping everything up, media hyping everything up. But once that football was snapped, all the hype went out the window, and we saw who had the best players, who were able to game plan the best, and who obviously ended up performing and executing the best. We did that the first 3 weeks with no issues, and then these last 3 weeks have really slowed down for us. And even though we've gotten the W's, we do need to get back to that ground and pound dominant style football that we saw early on. So like I mentioned before, this will be a very tell sign for not only the college rankings, but ACC rankings for us. Because when you really look at things, folks, Miami cannot afford to lose any games. We know how the ranking system looks at Miami. They're just waiting for Miami to have a downfall. And like I mentioned before, with the two other outliers, SMU and Clemson, you already had a Clemson team that has one loss against a Georgia. But as far as in-conference play, both of these other teams have not lost. So it's really important for Miami and us fans to know how important these next 3 weeks and the rest of ACC play will be. Now, going into our last topic of the podcast before we get out of here today is, of course, going to touch on this Louisville football program. Like I mentioned before, we will have our guy Kevin Wright of Card Chronicle join us on Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern. So make sure you set a reminder and subscribe to the CanesWear Daily Live podcast only on FTSN. But when you look at this team and this opponent, this matchup, like I mentioned before, every week there's some type of Super Bowl, some type of realm of why this game is just that more important. And this game in particular might actually be more important to Miami than it is to Louisville, right? And there's a lot to go into that, right? I think first, right off the bat, let's set the stage for what is about to happen this upcoming weekend, Saturday, 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock Eastern in Kentucky against Louisville. Right off the bat, this is the homecoming weekend, homecoming game scheduled for Louisville. So, as you know, homecoming games, that is essentially where you try to pack the house. Family members are going to come in. Your seniors are going to try to play their best game of football. And this is a team in Louisville that is in a do-or-die situation, right? We talked about SMU, Clemson, and our Miami Hurricanes and what the rest of the schedule lining up, what it means to ACC play. But this game in particular means a lot to Louisville as well, because if Louisville loses this game against Miami, they are going to be essentially out of the ACC race altogether, right? Non-conference games will essentially not matter at this point. You'll already have 3 losses in your conference play, and you'll still have Clemson and Pittsburgh still on the docket for Louisville. So that's a tough stretch, a look ahead. So when you really look at it, if Louisville loses this game, season's pretty much done. If they win this game, they knock off the Goliath and the Miami Hurricanes in this matchup. But then they're still playing for their season in jeopardy 2 or 3 more opportunities throughout the season in Clemson and Pittsburgh and others where Miami is going to be, playing on thin ice if we were to lose to Louisville, right? Then on top of that, local Miami Northwestern legend, Teddy Bridgewater, will not only be in attendance for this football game, who is also the head coach for Miami Northwestern, but his jersey will be getting retired at halftime for this Miami-Louisville game. So, not to mention his at homecoming, but Teddy Bridgewater's jersey will be retired. That's one of the many South Florida native guys that you'll need to keep an eye on this weekend, which I'll get to a couple of the other guys here shortly. And then, of course, last but not least, you got the Schellenberger Trophy. The boots is at stake. The Louisville-Miami matchup, the winner will be getting the Shelley Trophy. So I think this is, again, you got something at stake here, right? You got some hardware, and ultimately Mario and the staff understands that this is another in-conference game that we have to continue to battle and grind out and get a victory. Whether it's a blowout or whether it's a last play victory, again, as long as you get a W, that's all that matters. Now, another thing about Louisville, when you really look at this football team, like I mentioned before, they're playing with a lot left at stake here, right? They lose out of ACC essentially. But this is a team that really goes with the downsides of what I have seen in this Miami defense so far. Whether it's USF, Virginia Tech, or Cal, I think it's very clear that the second half adjustments of what Lance Guidry and this team has done has really helped us out, along with the offense, whether it's Cam Ward, X, and others, and of course Andy Borregales on the special teams. But when you look at what the opposing offenses have been able to capitalize and at least run on this defense and either create big plays or execute and have touchdown drives, all those things that have hurt Miami, these are all the things that benefit an offense like Louisville. These are all the things that a team like Louisville is used to doing, right? Getting the ball out fast, the up-tempo of what you saw in USF early on in that football game, right? Getting guys who are playmakers, who are fast, getting them the ball quick in space, and allowing the corners and the defenders to make those one-on-one tackles. Again, another thing that Miami has not been able to do, whether it's Virginia Tech, Cal, is the small fundamental things. And that is going to be one of the key things that in a bye week that you are going to have to continue to harp on, or those little fundamental things, because those essentially is what's going to win and lose football games. But just being able to execute the explosive plays, as y'all know, Louisville is very good at doing that. They got a quarterback who only has 3 interceptions, 1,600 passing yards, I believe, or not 1,600 passing yards. He's up there in passing yards, but he only has 3 interceptions, and he has no mistake about him as far as getting these playmakers the ball in hands and extending it down the football field. Now, who are some of these guys that we need to look out for? I mentioned already before, Teddy Bridgewater getting his jersey retired, local guy. We know, as us Miami fans, when we play opponents, any local guy at Miami who either went to Miami, played high school at Miami, or who always dreamed to put on that U helmet and either didn't get the offer or got passed up on, those are the guys that are going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder. We brought up Don Chaney, who's still a little bit banged up for Louisville, hasn't had a great season so far. But you also have another running back, a true freshman running back that Miami needs to keep his eye on. This running back by the name of Isaac Brown, true freshman, originally went to play high school at Homestead, currently has 508 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, along with a receiving touchdown. This is a young man who is about 5'8", 5'9", a little undersized in high school. But many of us who follow recruiting like myself, this is a guy that in our backyard has always been a playmaker, always a guy that is a bruiser, can take the ball and go 80, 90 yards and also break tackles. He could do a little bit of everything. And he was a player that I always wanted Miami to at least give an opportunity, a chance at, and a recruit. And unfortunately, we did not do that. And now he is at Louisville. and he is doing his thing as a true freshman. I mentioned his stats so far this season, but he also is coming off a back-to-back 100-yard rushing games and had 2 touchdowns in the last week win over Virginia, which was a close football game. So Isaac Brown, true freshman from Homestead High, will be a name to watch at the running back position. And, of course, at wide receiver, a name that you're going to want to watch is another local guy that went to Booker T. Washington before transferring to IMG his last year, and that's Ja'Cory Brooks, transfer from Alabama. He is a name that should be familiar with Miami fans. He's a guy that Miami has recruited not only in high school, but even when the transfer portal first went out, and we weren't sure who were some of these wide receiver targets we would be looking after, whether it was last year or the year before in the transfer portal window. Ja'Cory Brooks was a popular name that was out there both years. Unfortunately, we ended up going in a different direction with other guys. And Ja'Cory Brooks currently has 30 catches, 572 yards, and 6 touchdowns for the Louisville Cardinals. He is by far the playmaker, the number one player on that offensive side of the football. When you're wanting to get a guy in space, create plays, and obviously blow the top off of the secondary. And as I mentioned before, guys like Jaden Harris, Mish Powell in this secondary, you are not going to want to get caught looking or give a team like Louisville an early lead in the first half like you did with other opponents. And this is a team that, like I said before, the last thing that you want to look out for in this matchup, and of course there will be a lot of things we'll look into with our guy Kevin Wright on Wednesday of the Card Chronicle when we break this team and player watch down from beginning to end. But the last thing you're really going to want to look out for is the ACC outlook of this game. I mentioned before of what it means to Louisville as far as possibly losing this game and then essentially being knocked out of ACC race for the conference championship, but what it means for Miami, right? And I think the reason why I'm bringing this up and why it's very important for Miami to win this game is because I brought up a team in SMU who, very similar to Clemson, had the same schedule or same likelihood ahead of them to kind of win out, similar to Miami. But one of the common denominators that you're going to want to look for when it gets closer to the end of the season is, let's just say possibly all 3 teams in Clemson, SMU, and Miami win out the rest of the year as far as their conference games. That is now a 3-way tie in conference. So now you got to look at all 3 of these teams. What common opponents have they played, right? And SMU has already played Louisville, and Louisville lost to SMU. So we cannot lose to this Louisville team, because if we essentially lose to this Louisville team, right, and then somehow still run the table and cross our fingers and pray that SMU finds a way to lose a game, whether it's versus Pitt, at Duke, or have you whatnot, even if they do lose a conference game and we end up tied with SMU to play a team like Clemson in the ACC championship, your next tiebreaker is going to be what common teams have y'all played and have you guys both won those against those opponents. So if we don't beat this Louisville team and SMU does, and yet we still have the same record at the end of the day, that could be a tiebreaker to look out for coming at the end of the season that I think a lot of fans are really overlooking. So yeah, there you have it, folks. We talked for almost an hour here on this episode of the CanesWear Daily Live podcast. We talked about the bye week history. We talked about some NCAA rules, right? Whether it was the transfer portal news or the recruiting news. We also dipped into a little bit of recruiting with the University of Miami, brought up some key guys to look out for in the next coming months. And then we also touched on not only the college football rankings, AP rankings, but also the ACC standings and what it means for the future of the University of Miami and some of the scenarios moving forward. And of course, last but not least, we touched a little bit on this Louisville matchup for Saturday. And like I said before, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button on the CanesWear Daily Live podcast, only on FTSN. We will be having our show tomorrow night, me, Brett, Armando, and Cliff, and a possible guest. We will be doing that at 7 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, I will be having Kevin Wright of the Card Chronicle joining me at 7 o'clock Eastern to break down this matchup between Miami and Louisville. And of course, on Friday, I'll be doing a fan interaction podcast show. We'll be getting the fans more involved, a little bit of call in, getting some questions. And Saturday, we will be finishing off the week with the live show with me. Hopefully, Malik Rozier will be getting some fans as well. And we'll be watching the game live and getting all of your instant reactions and comments, just like we did against the Cal game, which we had over 600 viewers from beginning to end. So shout out to you Cane fans out there. And like I said before, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. I am your host, Brad Tejeda. We will see you tomorrow night. We're out.